Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to this week's HackSurfer Hangout. This week's guest is Chris Stock. He's the Director of Security Management Programs at TM Forum. Today we're going to be talking about kind of some of the stuff that they're doing around sharing and threat intelligence and some privacy stuff like that. As always, it's an open Q&A, so if anyone is out there watching, in Google there's a Q&A app where you can tweet to my Twitter handle, and I'll check that before we leave. And I will make sure to ask Chris those questions. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing well, thanks, Jeff, and thank you for inviting me on. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of excited to chat with you because I don't really know very much about TM Forum or really what you guys do and kind of how you're involved in cybersecurity. So maybe if you can kind of enlighten me a little bit.
Okay. We're a global not-for-profit organization, a trade association, for enterprises, service providers, and their suppliers. Our origins are very much in the telecommunications industry, but we've moved on a long way since then. And we're here to help our members collectively overcome the challenges of transforming IT and operations to give them the agility they need, really, to compete in the digital world that's rapidly evolving all around us. Yeah, that's broadly what we do.
Yeah, and then just kind of in terms of cybercrime and cybersecurity, kind of how do you fit into that space? Is that like a big focus of you guys, or is that just kind of part of what you do, or what?
The prime focus is to help all our members do really well in the digital environment. Probably in the last 5 years, we've brought security and privacy into the TM Forum tool set, if you like, because initially the focus was on getting our members to market as fast as possible, maximizing the opportunities available to them out there. And there's always going to be a conflict in terms of getting out there as fast as you can with the latest service, the latest device, whatever it might be, and ensuring you are secure in doing so. And how much security is your responsibility, how much is responsibility of the customer, where does that responsibility lie? There are a whole raft of issues around there. And I think what we're really about, or what I'm trying to do, is ensure that, yeah, we still help our members get to market as fast as possible. We still help them make the most of the opportunities out there. But in doing so, we raise security and privacy issues right up into the strategic decision-making process and ensure that they are being addressed from the get-go. That we aren't, having to deal with security issues sometime further downstream after a disaster. We're trying to put our members perhaps in the best position possible to get out there, knowing that barring the really unexpected, they're pretty well positioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm just kind of wondering then what sort of goes into that. I mean, like, say I'm a member of your organization and I'm kind of have some concerns about cybersecurity. I mean, what kind of benefits, I guess, do I get from being part of TM Forum, or how do you go about kind of helping the organizations?
Well, yeah, once a problem's been identified or has been brought into the organization, and we try and encourage the problems to be brought in by the service providers, by the big enterprises, we then put it to the members and say, who else is interested in this? And we have a huge membership. We have globally around 1,000 companies at the moment who are members of the TM Forum. So it's a wealth of experience and expertise to draw on. And we put the questions out there. And those who are interested then come together in this neutral, collaborative environment, and we generate projects around the issues. And those projects are supported by those members who have a vested interest in those areas. Having refined the question, we then try and bring in the suppliers to work out solutions to those problems. And that's where it becomes interesting, because potentially those suppliers are competitors. But it ensures that we get a really varied mix in there, and we get a really solid solution at the end of the day. From the security point of view, I suppose we're trying to raise the bar, the collective bar for security to a level at which everyone should be playing. We don't want to get into very specific areas where a particular company, enterprise, whatever it might be, might want to use security as a differentiator, but we want to raise the bar so everyone is operating in this secure in the new environment in a secure manner. I suppose the real driver is that a lot of what we're doing in this digital environment is all about rapid partnering, rapid collaborating with others, sharing information, connecting with lots of people, and it raises a raft of problems from a security perspective. Because you want to do it quickly, you don't want to spend too much time working out how secure is the guy I'm going to do business with, how secure is his product, what are the issues around connecting with him, do I trust him when he says, hey, I'm secure, mate, you can do business with me? Where does that get you? It's probably not a good approach. You want some guarantee that he is as secure as you're expecting him to be, and he'll want some guarantee if he's got worth his soul as to how secure you are. So it's enabling people to operate in this environment at the speed at which it's evolving, but in a secure manner. And it's putting the bedrock in, that bedrock of security that we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you don't, I guess one thing I was kind of curious about is, if you get kind of, like you mentioned, kind of competitors working together, I mean, is there any ever kind of issues where people maybe don't want to share because they, kind of don't want to sort of give away their hand, or do you find everyone's very helpful?
I have to come clean here and say I've been with the forum since December last year. To date, I found everyone incredibly helpful. I'm sure there will be issues where you're bringing people together who have vested interests in particular areas, and you have to manage that. And that's part of our role as staff within TM Forum, to manage these project teams, because we don't lead the project teams. We facilitate the bringing together of, first of all, the service providers, perhaps who've come up with the requirement or the initial gap that's been identified. But then we identify suppliers, vendors who are out there who are willing to participate in that project, and we decide on who's going to be the lead within that project. So it's quite an interesting exercise in bringing these people together. But from my experience to date, it's been quite it's worked out quite well, and I've not had any sort of real issues. And I suppose if you didn't want to participate or you didn't want to give something away, then you can stand back and maybe choose not to participate. It's entirely voluntary. All the work that we do, everything we produce at the end of the day, is created by the members for the members. So if they see the benefit in that, they'll want to participate, and they know what they're stepping into from the start. So there's no hidden clauses that come out at the end to say, oh, by the way, you should have known this or you should have known that. It's you're in this for your benefit because you see the benefit from the start.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like what types of sort of projects then, or like what types of concerns, like the businesses bring up. Is there kind of any, I don't know, like trends or kind of things that you see kind of in common that people are sort of struggling with, like in terms of cybersecurity or anything like that?
Right up front, when I first joined, I thought I'd put out a sort of strategic plan as to what I wanted to address with security. And it's fairly naive of me, but it was a good starting point. I said, right, we want to put in place something around basic common sense security, that which every organization should aspire to be a reliable, competent operator in this field. That was the sort of bedrock. And then I said, yeah, we ought to build on work that actually the TM Forum had already done with regard information sharing, because it's all very well securing that which you own, but if you only hear about problems when they hit your boundary, it's not terribly clever. You don't leave yourself very much time to react. If you then share threat intelligence information and information generally, you're then in a much better position, particularly if you share as broadly as possible. If you start to share information, not just within your own organization, but across sector and then multinationally, you're then potentially extending your threat horizon to a distance that gives you sufficient time to actually put in place mitigation strategies and the like. And so I had that central band. And then on top, to sort of complete the picture, there's a bit about making sure all the members are aware of that which is going on internationally within international organizations. Within the US, you've got NIST and you've got various organizations putting out cybersecurity frameworks and the like to help industry within the US. In Europe, you've got the EU Commission putting out various frameworks and various recommendations, and in some cases directives. And worldwide, there are all sorts of directives coming out, and it's helping our members to be aware of those, and if they want to, perhaps helping them to contribute to the development of those. So that was my big picture of everything that was in security. But I then had to go back to what's the origin of the TM Forum. It's all about helping these people do really well in the digital environment and transform to being a digital business really efficiently and make lots more money. They don't want to do security unless it's absolutely essential. The general perception is security and potentially privacy, I suppose, generates friction. With regard you getting to market as fast as possible, there's all sorts of issues it might throw up. It might take longer. It might affect the user experience in terms of you have to log on 15 different times or whatever it might be. There's a whole raft of issues that are perceived to sort of impact on maximizing the potential of some new service or device. Mm-hmm. So it's getting past that that we had to look at, and so what we've sort of I pulled back from that big will do security to, okay, what are the project areas that are going on in the rest of the TM Forum? And what are the security issues directly related to them? Because you get far better member buy-in to the security aspects of a project they're trying to push forward. They can see the relevance of the security there directly, and you get far greater buy-in. So I'm now in the process of identifying the security issues within the raft of projects that are going on within TM Forum and putting a security element into each of them to get people to understand, because to understand the benefits and the need for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even with, I guess it's something that people have always kind of struggled with, kind of getting people to buy into cybersecurity. I'm just kind of wondering, even with kind of all the huge breaches, like everyone always talks about Target and like all these other huge retail breaches, and just cybercrime is kind of growing so much, you'd think that it would be easier to get them to buy in. I mean, are you still finding that it's, even with that kind of increased awareness, it's still kind of difficult to get people to sort of move in that direction?
I think for organizations it's quite difficult if they're not directly affected to really understand the impact of one of these breaches. I know it's been all, there's the obvious examples in recent years, and they've been all over the media. I think there's a twitch in the boardroom. We ought to be doing something about this, but what? And can we do it without spending too much money? Can we? There's a bit of a sort of a negative feel to it, and one of the ways we're trying to address that is we produce a raft of standards-based best guidance, best practices that we put together in embracing an overarching sort of framework, what we call frameworks with an X, and that has processes for all sorts of things that a business might want to do. What I'm trying to do is ensure that each of the processes within that model has got security and privacy firmly highlighted within it. So as they're going through revenue management or whatever else it might be they want to do, it'll come up and say, actually, there's a few aspects here you really ought to consider from a privacy aspect or from a security aspect, and you ought to be addressing. At least it raises the awareness, because that is one of the other areas that I really want to hit on, is the education, the development of that sort of whole culture within the member organizations as a starter, so they're not caught out further downstream. But you're right, there's a raft of things out there at the moment. I can't help feeling that for those who weren't hit, it's a case of, okay, we weren't hit, we'll crack on. We won't invest too much. I might be being very naive there, but
yeah,
it's the sort of perception you get. But yeah, maybe it's just a perception.
Yeah.
I hope it's just a perception.
Well, yeah, I mean, just kind of one more question along those lines. I mean, not to kind of stay on this point too long, but I guess, we kind of see so many studies and kind of things along those lines. I'm just wondering if you kind of have any insight into why, despite all the awareness, that businesses sort of aren't maybe taking that step. Is it that they're confused and don't really know what to do, or is it that they don't want to, or they think it's going to cost too much money, or they don't want to spend the money, or, I mean, is it something else? Do you have any kind of insight on that at all?
I think for the large organizations, it'd be wrong to characterize them in the way I've been talking, probably. The large service providers are well aware of the issues, and especially those that are global in nature will have a very strong security element to all they do. They have huge security organizations as part of them. I think there's a tendency within those organizations, though, to restrict their ability to deal with security threats to that which they do, to just their own organization. There's no intent really to share it too broadly beyond their own boundaries. They might share it within their sector if it's into, and the particular one I'm thinking of about banking, where it's in the interest of all bankers to be able to share threat information because they're all equally likely to be targets. And they have, I know, set up an organization whereby they can share information very rapidly. And similarly with telcos, in regions, they do share information. But you could get an awful lot more if you start to share more broadly and brought it in from other sectors, because increasingly, as we become more digitized, the sort of threats that a totally unconnected sector could receive can apply to another quite happily. And so there'll be benefit in sharing that sort of information and having it there. Yeah, that's probably...
Yeah, so just, kind of moving on to sort of some other stuff I wanted to ask about. I was poking on your website earlier, and I noticed you guys have some different events, like you have Action Week coming up, I think July 21st. Just wondering, like, what Action Week is and, how that works for you.
Action Week is a really great event, actually, because being a global organization, the projects can span many continents, and Action Week is the one where we have two a year, and it's 2 occasions when we actually get together face to face as far as possible. What we try and do is, before Action Week, we put in place potential projects, potential catalysts, and I'll mention catalysts in a bit, but basically they're all projects of one type or another, but we get together in Action Week and thrash out who's going to take part in what are the sort of subjects we really want to take forward. And these are the members, not staff. These are members of TM Forum who, having identified critical areas, get together and thrash out how the project teams are going to be formed, who's going to be in them, how they're going to work it for the next 6 months. And that leads up to then either demonstration projects, which we call catalysts, or delivery of just project products in the next sort of high-profile event, which might be, we've just had TM Forum Live in Nice, which is very much a huge front shop window for us, if you like, where for a week we've got presentations, discussions, workshops, you've got an expo, we demonstrate catalysts, projects, and we have a series of directed speaker sessions on the various strands within the forum. And that happens, well, we've just had Nice, and then we've got Digital Disruption coming up in December in San Jose, which is a similar event, slightly smaller, but where the same sort of thing takes place. So there's this cycle of developing sort of prototype projects, taking them to Action Week to actually develop them, bring teams together, identify leads. We then go away again and virtually develop the project work over the next 2-3 months, and then where possible we present at the next main event, which is a great thing to do. It's probably worth just mentioning the Catalyst projects, because they are short-term collaborative projects that are led by the members, as are all the projects. Create solutions addressing today's most pressing operational or systems challenges, to develop and enhance our best practices and standards, and they can also feed into this frameworks model that I alluded to before. As with all the ordinary projects, the requirement is set really by the end users, the communications and digital service providers, amongst others, defense agencies, MSOs, enterprise IT departments, and the solutions created by multi-project teams again, by multi-company project teams. Each, for a Catalyst, you've got to have at least 3 member companies taking part, and frequently they are technology suppliers. At the conclusion, these are actually presented, they display the findings at the flagship events, as I say, of either Nice or San Jose. But the key thing there is those who've taken part get their name up in lights as the participants and the people who've actually contributed to the solutions. So a great event.
Yeah, that sounds cool. We do have one question out there for Monica, kind of about some stuff you're doing. She says, I'm curious about your open digital program and how these very different providers are working together to create a simpler and more open system. Can you tell us about that?
For the open digital program, they're doing exactly as I've described for the security program. They are bringing together service providers to highlight the issues, and they're currently narrowing down to projects to take forward. They have exactly the same issues as we have with regard to bringing together potential competitors, but again, I've not heard of any issues regarding the various companies who are involved at all. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the areas that we're really moving into, particularly the Internet of Things is one where we're trying to bring the security issues to the fore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd also heard, I think I spoke to you a little while back, and I think you kind of brought up like some privacy scoring kind of things that you guys were doing. Just kind of curious, it's kind of part of the thing we want to talk about today is sort of privacy. I guess it's sort of a really big thing, especially over the last year, here in the USA at least, a lot of people talking about the NSA and Edward Snowden, and I think a lot of individuals are getting more concerned about their privacy. So just kind of maybe if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for those very reasons, we wanted to pick up on privacy probably about 6 months ago. And the first issue we hit was globally, privacy is dealt very differently in each nation. In America, you've got quite a big sort of landmass to deal with, but in Europe, you've got all those little countries side by side, each with different sets of legislation when it comes to privacy. So what we wanted to do was to look at how you might assess the privacy of, or how your privacy was treated by either a service, if you were going to take up a service or buy a service, or potentially an organization. And we thought a service would be the best thing to start with. And what we did was we looked at a service from the point of view of a customer, a lay person who didn't know an awful lot about what came under that general heading of privacy. And we started to look at the questions you should ask of that service provider, of the provider of the service, with regard how your data was being treated. The first obvious question was the concept of consent. What sort of consent was being given by the customer with regard to the data he is providing? Did he know that he had an option to give you consent or not to give you consent to use his data in any other way. There's a whole raft of stuff around there. We then looked at things like metadata. How was metadata being handled? How would your data be stored? For how long would it be stored? What happened at the end of the storage period? How was the data being transmitted? Who was handling the data? How was the data handled? Was it human handlers? Was it machine to machine, which was deemed as very, very private? When did humans get involved? Became significantly less private depending on how they got involved. How were the people who were handling the data trained? And that included the customer. Did he know how to deal with the data he was providing, etc., etc. But the end result meant that you could fill out a brief chart with regard to these questions as they pertain to a service you were about to either adopt or purchase, whatever, and you'd come up with a score, and you'd get a good feel as to how your data was being treated or would be treated by that service. And you could make a much better balanced decision with that knowledge, and you effectively became an intelligent customer then, rather than before, where you'd be wading through reams of very, very small print to try and determine how your privacy might be treated. Actually, and in most cases, people just sign that without thinking. Because it's not something, it's just too much bother to work through. So this was a simple way of a layperson, just assessing how his data was going to be treated. Was he happy to do business or to adopt that service? And that's what we demonstrated at Nice, and I had quite a good sort of feedback on that. And then we had, well, the next stage we're looking at is, can we develop that to create a score for an organization? So if you've got a choice of organizations to do business with, and you have some fairly hard and fast sort of security or sort of privacy principles that you wish to adhere to, can you actually, at a glance, assess how a particular organization treats privacy? And yeah, that's the sort of headline sort of view on what we're doing. But there are also issues behind that, in that we're only looking at the organization's intent with regard to privacy at that stage. We still haven't delved into, can it actually follow through on what they say they want to do with regard to privacy? So that starts to bring back into the security element. How well can they secure your data, et cetera, in the process? But yeah, it's definitely flavor of the month, and particularly with around things like big data, which is another stream within the TM forum. We've got a lot of interest there where they want to look at privacy issues within big data right now.
Yeah, we're almost running out of time here. One question I kind of want to touch on is sort of like government involvement, because that kind of has to do with sharing and privacy. Sort of here in the U.S., there's been a few stories about, they want to have the government, sort of partner with these industry verticals, to kind of increase sharing. But then at the same time, you got, like we were just talking about with the NSA, people are concerned on the privacy front. So I'm wondering, like, within your organization, do you have like government agencies at all sort of involved in kind of sharing and collaborating, or are they kind of kept out?
No, they're not kept out. I'm seeking to sort of engage with them, because I think it's important that you do get them in, or at least understand that their viewpoint and where they're coming from. In previous work I was involved in, it was really around information sharing and how can you enhance your situational awareness of cyberspace and around. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier, the threat intelligence sharing, because, as I say, the more broadly you can share, the better the warning time and all the rest of it. But it's all well and good if you have a sort of federating sharing mechanism where organizations are sharing amongst themselves. You still, to maximize the benefit of the data there, you want someone, whether it's a larger organization or company or enterprise, who's going to sit just a little bit above the others, not in any sort of superior way, but as a sort of hub to bring the data together. Because it's only when you aggregate the data and start to look at the sort of the overarching trends that you really get some useful information regarding potential future attacks. And if you trusted a government to do it, a government provides a useful hub, or could provide a useful hub, and you'd like to think they could feed into it. Unfortunately, they've rather lost their reputation with all the recent revelations about just how much they were gathering anyway. So it's a tricky one. But I wouldn't rule out at least talking to government agencies and the likes. But at the end of the day, what we do is for the members. If the members don't want to, then we won't. It's down to what do the member companies really want to achieve, and who do they want to be involved.
Yeah, well, we're out of time here. I just wanted to get your thoughts on one final thing. Over at HackSurfer, we kind of have every month we kind of focus in on, I guess, a different issue. And since it's now been a year since sort of Edward Snowden and the NSA and all that stuff that came out, I guess the last year everyone's really been talking about encryption and kind of how it can be used and if it's the answer to a lot of problems out there. So just, everyone we talk to, we're just trying to kind of get their general thoughts, on encryption. If you have anything that kind of sticks out in your mind.
I think if you accept nowadays that there's a lot of people out there saying most people don't know they've been hacked, don't know they've got people inside their systems. If your data is encrypted, it does make it that much harder for them to get what they want out of you. If you haven't been able to keep them out, then at least when they get to whatever they think they want, it's still going to decrypt it if they have the capability to do that. With good encryption, that could be pretty difficult. The downside, I suppose, is if you run an organization and you say, right, we're going to have encrypted systems for certain levels of information, and for the rest we'll have unencrypted, who makes a decision as to what goes on what? Invariably, the encrypted systems tend to be a little bit slower, a little bit more tortuous to use than the unencrypted. And you could end up, you end up with people abusing the system or just forgetting or getting it wrong. And you end up losing control completely if you're not careful. So, yeah, if you've got something, and it comes back to, I suppose, your risk assessment at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. If you think you have stuff that you really don't want to get into other people's hands, or at least them to be able to read if they get it, then encryption's great. But you've got to make that assessment. What is it? It's a risk assessment at the end of the day. Is what I've got here so absolutely critical to me, and would it be a disaster if it fell into anyone else's hands? Then fine, go for encryption. But I think you do need to sort of stand back and say, why am I trying to encrypt it? What is it? What is it? Does it really matter if other people get that? But that applies to the whole piece around security. It's got to be a risk assessment, because at the end of the day, you've got to get value for money out of what you're doing. It's a return on investment, if you like. How much security do you put in place, and how much do you let run because you don't think it's worth the cost?
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time today. We appreciate you kind of stopping by for a virtual chat, Chris.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Yep. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.